All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 426 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Mike Lamelli.
Wait, I'm sorry. 1 second. My recording is messing up. Sorry. Give me
You're
one
fine.
second. It says
It's easier to mess up at the beginning.
invalid sample rate.
I had this error too before we started recording on my mic.
Interesting. Maybe I need to...
Was Audacity not like reading your mic?
No, well, for me it was my computer had updated and then it changed forgot the settings that I had.
Testing. Okay, I think it's working now. Cool.
Okay.
That's good.
Just have to restart Audacity.
All right. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 426 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley.
Nadine Smith.
And in today's episode, we're going to continue our Horror for Kids series with 2018's The House with a Clock in Its Walls. And then in part 1, we're going to do movies that we saw this week, which also kind of lean into the Eli Roth angle, since we're talking about an Eli Roth movie. So perfect setup. Real quick, be sure to check cinematary.com. We're going to have reviews up soon of the TIFF movies that we saw. So find those hopefully by the end of the month at the website. But let's go ahead and start talking about some movies. Michael, I'm going to kick it off with you. Had you not seen any Eli Roth movies and you're trying to kind of journey through it, or what's?
Yeah, basically, I had seen Cabin Fever, which I think is his directorial debut or something, which is just okay. So like a bunch of irritating people get killed in a cabin. But I signed up for this because I was thinking maybe this is my time to get on the Eli Roth train, because there is a train full of Eli Roth fans, and I thought, let's see what they're up to. And so I actually reached out to Nadine and said, what should I watch? And Nadine suggested I watch the Hostel movies, the first two, I guess.
I am a defender, apologist, perhaps.
Yeah, they were good. They were good, but the one I want to talk about is the other one you recommended, which is Knock Knock from 2015. And so I queued up Knock Knock after watching the Hostel movies and liking them to a pretty decent degree. And Knock Knock stars Keanu Reeves, who is this guy on it's Father's Day. Like, the movie opens up and it's Father's Day, and his wife is wishing him happy Father's Day, and then his kids come and wish him happy Father's Day, and he seems real happy, right? He's got this nice domestic life, and his family goes away for the weekend, but he has to stay home and work on Father's Day. Or I guess they're gone for the day. I'm not really sure. It feels like a weekend, even though Father's Day is usually a Sunday. It doesn't really matter, though. The important thing is, while his family is gone, there's a torrential rain. And during this torrential rain, these two young ladies knock on the door, hence the title of the movie. And he opens the door, and they're Uber has dropped them off in the wrong place. And they're supposed to be across town. And so I have to call another Uber to get across town, but because it's a rainy weekend night, there's not a lot of people Ubering, so they got to wait 45 minutes for their next Uber. And while they're waiting, they're just kind of hanging around Keanu's house. And it turns out Keanu Reeves used to be a DJ in his former life before he had kids and such.
He collects vinyl.
He collects vinyl. He makes a big point of collecting vinyl. And explaining the vinyl to these women, and they seem really interested. And eventually it becomes clear that they're coming on to him and want to have sex with him. and he's all like, "Oh no, I'm a married man. I'm happily married." But so he's like killing time until their Uber comes, while also like theoretically at least like kind of trying not to have sex with these women who are like almost literally throwing themselves at him by the end of this.
Isn't one of them Ana de Armas?
Yeah. I forgot about this. So one of the women is actually Lorenza Izzo.
Oh yeah, she's in
Who
this
is
movie.
yeah. So she's I think she's married to Eli Roth. Is that correct? Yeah, she's married to Eli
Yeah, I think
Roth.
so.
And then the other one is Ana de Armas, which is the earliest role that I've seen her in. I don't know what else that she's been in before this. But anyway, so these two people are like, come on, just monogamy is a social construct, blah blah blah. Like, and while they're doing this, they're getting increasingly like undressed as well because for like seemingly innocent reasons, like, oh, our clothes are wet because of the rain, and Keanu's like, hey, I'm gonna go throw them in the dryer. And so like honestly, like the first like 30 minutes of this movie is really really funny because it's basically like a porn setup, and like but Keanu is like refusing to admit that he's in this setup for a very long time. It's almost like the beginning of oh shoot, how am I forgetting? Shaun, yeah, it's almost like the beginning of Shaun of the Dead, how like for the first 30 minutes no one sees the zombies around them because they're oblivious, and like Keanu's kind of doing that except that he's in porn. But finally he kind of succumbs to the pressure, and they get fairly coercive, and I don't know, like one of the interesting things is like the extent to which like the sex that he eventually has with these two people is consensual or not, because he objects pretty vehemently at times. But regardless, they do the deed all night long apparently, and he wakes up in the morning and they're still there. They've missed their Uber and they're still in his house. And
when that happens.
And they've turned. I saw someone on Letterboxd compare this movie to Gremlins, and like in this way, that's like, because he fed them after midnight, basically, and they've turned into mayhem. Like he wakes up and they've cooked breakfast, but they've like trashed the kitchen and doing so. They're like throwing pancakes across the room and things like that, and they just won't leave his house anymore. And eventually, they start trying to blackmail him. Because they have evidence now that he slept with them, and not only has he now cheated on his wife, but they also tell him that they are underage, which is like a note of ambiguity in the movie, because there's other stuff in the movie that indicates that they are in fact lying about that, but it's not clear. And so then the movie devolves into basically like a home invasion movie in which like these people that he invited in and had sex with will not leave. They like simply will not leave his house, and then they start torturing him.
Simply Boonwellian.
It truly is. They start torturing him first psychologically and then like actually physically, and it gets pretty grody by the end. And that's kind of like the movie. And I liked it. I thought it was really funny. Like, to be honest, like one of the things I had heard about Eli Roth is like, oh, his movies are funny. These are all like horror comedies, and I didn't really feel that to a great extent in like Hostel. Like there's an element of humor in those movies, but those movies are very grim. And this movie though is just very funny. Like not just the setup, but also like where this movie eventually goes. It like escalates in absurdity to points that I think are like amusing, and they're also kind of gross though too. And like that's kind of like the tension of the movie, is that there's like this kind of like amusing like absurdity that's also grounded in like these weird gender politics, and I'm not exactly sure how to sort them out, and I'm curious if Nadine maybe has more insight being a fan. But it's like in some ways it's like the like middle-aged heterosexual man's like worst nightmare, of like this is like a pre-Me Too movie, but it like has like elements of that where he's like, I was coerced into sleeping with these young women who the next morning then say that I have like abused them and raped them and all that, but I was the victim. And like it's very much a movie that can play into that, but then there's also like a lot of stuff in the movie that is deeply ambiguous about Keanu's character, and like
he's
the
like
to which
very unlikable, and like very much this sort of like, you know, like the sort of detail about him being this like vinyl snob. He's like just sort of this spoiled, kind of aloof, like, you know, and so it writes that line of like, you know, is he indulging here? Like, is he being, you know, sort of passive and sort of entertaining their company when he could maybe be like ushering them out a little bit more aggressively? Or, you know, is he genuinely being sort of, you know, violated? It sort of asks that question of like, what's the power dynamic here? And
it does. And he has this
shifting.
He has this speech near the end of the movie that is honestly hilarious. You remember the free pizza speech, Nadine?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the movie, he's like so mad at these girls/women. Like, you know, it's unclear what their age is, actually, but he's so mad at them, and he gives this like rant that honestly it feels like a Brett Kavanaugh like style rant, like, you know, being, you know, in front of the Supreme Court or something like that, where he is like justifying himself and his behavior. But the way that he does so is really weird and revealing. Like, he is like, I was just minding my own business. You guys came to my house and then just started throwing yourself at me. It was like free pizza. What was I supposed to do? I don't know. There's just something very revealing and weird about like him saying that these women are like free pizza. I don't know. But it's also very funny because Keanu is like peak Keanu in this movie in the sense of like he's like kind of stilted and has this, you know, Keanu has this like I can't mimic him, but a lot of people make fun of his limited acting in like stuff like Bram Stoker's Dracula or something like that. And like this movie is kind of leaning into his like stiltedness. And
I feel like it's so rare, like, you know, because oh shit, my mic just came unplugged. I'm so sorry. Fuck. Okay, we're back. But I feel like, you know, the kind of opinion, the critical opinion has changed a lot on Keanu. I mean, he's always had his fans and defenders, but I just feel like the overall opinion of him the past few years, and a lot of it is like his public persona and whatnot, but, you know, it's just become like much more positive overwhelmingly, I feel like, than it kind of was in the past. And people were much more like, you know, were much more likely to make jokes about that kind of stiltedness and the sort of like Bill and Ted, you know, dumb surfer guy affect or whatever. And I feel like this is the rare, because I don't know, now he's, I mean, I'm trying to think of like the most recent thing I saw him in, but maybe it's just the like nature of John Wick or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's
different, but I feel like Knock Knock is like the rare movie recently that like plays into, because something like John Wick plays into another part of his persona, which is like the action hero, badass, Matrix, Point Break, etc. You know, like, and this goes into that Bram Stoker, like The Lake House, you know, that sort of like melodramatic, weird Keanu, where it's like he's trying to convince you he's a real human, and there's something that feels sort of strange about it, like almost like Putty from Seinfeld a little bit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I don't know. I like this movie, as with a lot of Eli Roth. Like it rides. It's very provocative, like intentionally so, and really rides a fine line in terms of like it finds like the kind of like nerve, like the open, like nervy topics, and like really pokes at them in ways that are like uncomfortable to deal with, but also like with plausible deniability of like, oh, am I really making this kind of like reactionary, like, you know, anti-women movie, or is it actually, you know, a commentary on this? Like, there's a lot of like that, and I felt like that's like a through line in all of the Eli Roth movies I've seen, is that playing with really hot button issues in a way that doesn't like have a very clear theme or motive, and so it leaves you like, a big part of the movie is kind of questioning what those motives are. And being kind of fascinated by the possibilities of what they could be, while also kind of like feeling a little gross and repulsed in a way. I don't know. That was my kind of feeling on Knock Knock.
No, it's there's I don't think this movie was like a deliberate influence or conscious influence when he was going in, but there is an interview from when the movie came out where the interviewer asks him if he's seen a movie that has been discussed on the podcast before, I think, a few years ago, but Daisies, the Czech,
Yeah,
the
it is
Czech film.
100%.
And he's like, oh yeah, like totally, I like that movie. Like I could totally see the comparison there. Like, somebody should program that as a double feature, haha. So I don't think that was a conscious influence, but I do think it hits this very similar kind of point of just like, I mentioned like Boonwell sort of jokingly earlier, but I think there's some of that energy and even a little, another problematic filmmaker, but there's definitely some like kind of 60s, 70s Polanski vibes, like The Tenant or something, where it's this kind of isolated, bottled up space and like things are going haywire and it's a little bit theatrical, and then kind of like the bottled, isolated location and the premise. I feel like, but I feel like there is that kind of like sort of 60s kind of like satirical comedy of like, manners, social norms kind of thing where it's just like a very different sort of socio-political movie or whatever you want to call it than like usually I feel like is made now. I feel like now, especially in this isn't like quite a clear horror movie in the way that something like Hostel is. I feel like it's got that sort of thrillery. I don't know. It's just it's got multiple tones, which Eli Roth usually does. But I just feel like it's like so many horror movies now are very kind of directly stating their themes and intentions and metaphors and stuff. And I feel like Eli Roth, throws a lot of contentious, complicated things out there, but it never really quite lands in one direction. And so there is that element, like you said, of like, it does sort of feel like there is an element of like maybe Eli Roth himself even kind of has these feelings or illicit desires, especially casting his wife in it, being
for sure.
A middle-aged man himself. Like there is that kind of self-implication a little bit, which in some ways like, makes it maybe more problematic, but in other ways also makes it more like aware of itself maybe, because I feel like he is a little bit more willing to like acknowledge him. I don't know, just the way he kind of casts himself, like sometimes even in like bit parts and stuff in his movies as like in Hostel, I think he's like, in the background or whatever, is like a dumb tourist in a club. And I think, Cabin Fever also, he's like another kind of like very Scooby-Doo like character. And I feel like that willingness to sort of like, he is very much in some ways like a film school bro, like that's his sort of background, but there is a real, I think, sort of a good naturedness a little bit in a weird way, which is a weird word to apply to him, but just in terms of like he is willing to sort of take himself down a few pegs. And I think that it's almost kind of a like Brian De Palma thing a little bit, where it's just like there's a lot of weird gaze and desire and stuff sort of being acknowledged and played with, and it doesn't really go one way or the other.
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but like to your point, I think a lot of the kind of well-regarded horror movies today, it very much is like going, this is what it's about, and like we're going to tell you about that. It's usually trauma because they're not that unique, and so it's like trauma. That's what we're going to be talking about, or something. It's very telegraphed on like what they're talking about, and it's almost like a lecture where it's like just follow this and take notes. And from what you're describing, it seems like this more. It has those ideas, but it's not about that. Those are just kind of baked into the story itself and are kind of coming out of that naturally. And it's not saying that whether it's good or bad, it's just kind of saying this is just some weird shit happening in the mind. And yeah, I agree. That's not necessarily what you find in a lot of modern horror movies, or not modern, but like recent horror movies.
I think there's like I think one of the things that's like very pronounced in this movie and also the Hostel movies, though, is also this kind of impishness in realizing that like the moment he does certain things in the movie, people are going to start to try to look for those like telegraphed messages, and then he like refuses to give them at all. Like the Hostel movies are very much like informed by like American intervention in like Afghanistan and stuff. Like they're like the imagery is like straight from like, you know, Abu Ghraib and like Guantanamo and like all those sort of things. But there's like a refusal to like make a, it's not a refusal to make a thesis, but it's a refusal to like have a thesis that is like easily parsed as like a single like thematic statement or something.
Yeah. Also, his Death Wish remake is very much the same way, where it's like constantly with a lot of the sort of signifiers it uses. It's like, is this legitimately reactionary, or is this like a representation of the paranoid delusions of a conspiratorial middle-aged white man who's like losing his grip on society? And it kind of goes back and forth, where it's like, what is the perspective here? Is it sincere? Is it ironic?
Yeah. Well,
it's like in that movie, there's an incredible image where Bruce Willis reads Milton Friedman to his daughter in a coma.
Oh my gosh.
So,
true horror.
Really well. Yeah.
The other movie I wanted to talk about came directly out of this, because after I finished Knock Knock, I looked it up on Wikipedia, and it turns out that it's a remake of a 70s movie. So in a sense, it makes sense that we were just comparing this to like kind of older horrors like from the 70s and stuff, because this is like in a lot of ways beat for beat like a 70s movie called Death Game, which stars Colleen Camp as like the Ana de Armas character, and then let's see, who's the other person in this? Someone named Sandra Locke. I'm not familiar with her. Colleen Camp actually.
She was married to Clint Eastwood.
No way! Wow, yeah. A lot of wives in these
together
movies.
On a lot of things.
Colleen Camp makes a bit appearance in Knock Knock. She's the concerned neighbor.
Oh my god, I forgot that.
But she's like one of the gremlins in this movie. And this movie, like honestly, this movie took Knock Knock down a couple pegs for me, because it is so. If I had watched this movie first, Knock Knock wouldn't have felt so intriguing. It's kind of like one of those where it's like so close. And also like the film style is unhinged. Like it's completely unhinged. Whereas like Knock Knock is very like smooth and considered, which is kind of like Eli Roth's thing. He's very technically precise. Whereas this movie was made with this, like the set and the shooting was like chaotic apparently, because there were like financial problems that halted production at multiple points. People apparently were like just miserable and didn't get along with each other and stuff. And so I think this movie was kind of stitched together in the editing room. And as a result, just feels, I don't know, it feels like brushing up against like psychedelic film or something like that. While at the same time, like hitting the same beats as are in that movie. And I actually like this movie better than Knock Knock. I mean, they're both worth watching if any of this sounds interesting. But this is the one that feels like, I don't know. There's just, maybe it's just me preferring like that kind of like grimy, like 70s, like grindhouse aesthetic. But like, there is something about this movie. This movie, like I like very much feels like Daisies. Like, and it's not just like the style of the film, but like the way that the girls act is like much more chaotic. Like the girls in Knock Knock are kind of, they're sinister and calculating. And I mean, they're eventually kind of chaotic as well. But it's always like very calculated and thought through, or it seems to be thought through. Whereas the girls in this movie are like completely out of, like just like completely out of control in a way that very much feels like Daisies. There's even a bunch of like food destruction in this movie, like there is in Daisies. And in fact, like they get so busy like throwing food around and throwing it at this middle-aged man that they have like tied up, that they run out of food and have to order groceries because they forgot that they also need to eat as they're like keeping this guy hostage. And so there's like that sort of stuff that kind of indicates that they're just really acting off the cuff. The middle-aged guy in this movie, the Keanu character, is like kind of like he's just a lot more obviously gross. And maybe it's just a difference in time period. Like someone from like a well-to-do middle-aged man in the 70s just scans as grosser to us now than like a well-to-do middle-aged man in the 2010s.
That's nice. At least we progressed in how middle-aged men are appear.
Maybe. I mean, maybe it's just a context thing. But he's got like, the classic like porn stash. He's got. Oh, in fact, like when he's having the threesome with the women, there's like legit like porn music, like the kind of like slap bass sort of thing going on. Yeah, it like really leans into like the porn stuff, which makes sense because like a lot of exploitation film at the time was just like in the same like bubbling in the same waters as like actual porn.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that there's like a crossover like that's much more conscious in this movie. But at any rate, Death Game is really cool and really wild, and it's the kind of movie that feels like you're watching it and you're just being like shaken by the movie the whole time because it's just like flipping everywhere. And there's these like wild like dissolves. In fact, like the like kind of sex montage is like there's like 3 or 4 dissolves of like sexual acts on top of each other. So it's just like this like swirling phantasmagoric miasma of like human skin just like swirling in front of you like as the like porn music plays. And I don't know, like I recommend seeking this movie. I'm recommending both movies, but like if you got to watch one, I would say Death Game is the one. I didn't finish though. The guy who is the Keanu character is played by Seymour Castle. And like I said, he's a lot more gross. He's a lot more. There's a lot less characterization of him in this movie. He almost is like a symbol or an archetype because you like the amount of time that it takes between him, the beginning of the movie, and then him like sleeping with these women is like maybe under 10 minutes. Like the movie like speeds through that, and so there's a lot less of this like we're kind of analyzing his happy home life, and then we're analyzing like his record collection and stuff like that. I think he's like on the phone with like a business partner or something, like chuckling about like some business deal. And he's got this gross like stash, and he's just like, he's basically just like sitting on top of the world, just like chuckling. And then in come these 2 women who like immediately humiliate him like after sex. And just like, it just is deranged and like a lot more pointed. And I don't know that this movie really lends itself to a theme, like, but it's also not coy about what it's doing like Eli Roth can be. Like it's very much like this dude is the worst and we're going to show you a movie in which he's just humiliated for like an hour.
That's funny because I feel like more like in terms of recent context, people know Seymour Castle from being Max Fisher's dad in Rushmore, and I think he was in a couple of other Wes Anderson movies.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
No way. Yeah, this is Wes Anderson could never make this movie.
I would be super down to watch a Wes Anderson, what you just described as Death Game, but Wes Anderson makes it. God. Wes Anderson should make it just a movie where people fuck. That would be weird.
I will say the one like Wes Anderson element of this movie, now that we mention it, is there's like this repeated song throughout because it's like a 70s movie, and what would a 70s movie be without like just 2 or 3 songs on the soundtrack that you repeat multiple times?
Yeah, that's true.
And there's this song called let me see if I can find the title of it, but it's like this like really jaunty, like sounds like it's like a Shirley Temple musical song or something like that, about like how awesome Good Old Dad is the name of the song. It opens the movie and that's it's awesome. Like this like jaunty like old school musical song about like how nice dad is and how he taught me all these manners or whatever. And then so like as you see this businessman like chortling about business is playing that song, and then like it plays that song periodically throughout the rest of the movie while these women are just like brutalizing him. I don't know, it's like the only thing that feels Wes Anderson-y is like having this like semi-ironic like vintage song that plays at certain points. Anyway, I've talked a lot about my 2 movies, but they're both worth watching. different vibes, but very similar plots.
Okay. Well, Knock Knock. I just looked. I'll just say so. Lorenza Izzo, or whatever her name is, and Eli Roth got divorced in 2019.
Oof. When?
2019. So
I thought you said 2016. I was like, it was the movie.
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of a weird movie to make with the person you're. It's a little eyes wide shut Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman kind of vibe going on.
All right, well, Nadine, I'm going to toss it over to you to talk a little bit about another nice horror auteur, modern horror auteur, Rob Zombie.
Yeah, and another wife guy, I guess, also
big old
because a slightly bigger wife guy because they are still together and seem to perhaps always, they seem very deeply in love because the films of Mr. Robert Zombie are pretty much all of them, I think, star his wife Sherry Moon Zombie in a pretty major capacity. And even like Halloween 2, she's like a phantasm or something, and he just finds his excuse to sneak her in there. And even though his movies are very violent and frequently very depraved, there is a lot of love in them. And The Munsters is very fittingly a love story about Herman Munster and whatever his the bride of Munster's name is.
Mrs. Munster.
Spooky Count Chocula, like
Lily Munster.
There we go. Lily Munster. Her search for
I like the bride of Munster though.
A sufficiently undead husband to be betrothed to. She's living with her like vampire count's dad, uncle, older relative, guardian figure, and he's like, oh, none, trying to set her up with all these like frigid ghouls, and she's like, no, I want someone to eat brains with or something, I don't know. And she one day catches the eye of Herman Munster, who has been brought to life through a scientific experiment, much like the monster of Frankenstein. And he is like some genius brain being put in a I don't know, one of those kind of things. Some Gollum stuff. But the experiment goes wrong, and but he's like this artistic genius. He's basically kind of like the Joker, like in the Joker being a stand-up comic. Like he's doing this weird like performance art, and he's this like sensitive, creative soul. He's in a like noise band. Actually, it seems to be very perhaps something of a indirect adaptation of the story of Rob Zombie and Sherry Moon Zombie falling in love, because much like the band of Herman Munster in this film, Rob Zombie's musical career, of course, and the band White Zombie actually began as something, one of the more famous bands that is associated with the nu metal category in the 1990s. But they actually started as like something much more of a noise art rock project and they were students at the Pratt Institute in New York, and so kind of coming out of that like New York downtown scene a little bit. And I think you can see that and hear that in Rob Zombie's music and in his movies. There's a very kind of like collage element. I mean, you can tell fittingly that his dream project, aside from a biopic of Groucho Marx, which hopefully will someday still happen, but The Munsters was his dream project because he's a huge fan. And there is a kind of like channel changing element to a lot of his work where there's just like all of these little quotations, things pulled from various old horror movies. He's a huge fan of the Universal monster movies. I feel like, in his Halloween remakes, he almost treats Michael Myers as more like a sort of Frankenstein type tragic figure, as opposed to this sort of just like vessel for violence that is the kind of original John Carpenter imagination of it. He's kind of interested in, and then something like The Devil's Rejects 2 is like does ask you in a weird way to like have some kind of empathy for these like horrible violent people, and I feel like that's just kind of like very much what a quality that the early old school monster movies that we think of have. I feel like there was this just sort of like, oh, the tragic downfall of the outsider scientist whose experiment goes wrong or whatever, the tragic count, and like you know, all of that kind of stuff. There's always this just sort of like pity the monster, you know, kind of element to it. So it's, you know, it makes sense. I feel like that he would be attracted to something like The Munsters, which is like, you know, turning literally monsters and horror into a sitcom and into this family friendly kind of thing. And so a lot of that the movie is this just like love story between Herman and Lily. And so it's obviously a very different tone than most of Rob Zombie's movies, which have frequently skirted the line of NC-17. I think House of a Thousand Corpses sat on the studio shelf for like a couple of years because he really just was like, this is probably my one shot at a movie. Let's just go all out. Of course, it was not the only movie he made, but all his movies consistently since then have gone pretty all out in terms of content, and a fitting kind of connection to, you know, we were just talking about Eli Roth, and this, much like the movie we'll be talking about next, House with a Clock in Its Walls, this is, you know, a sort of child-friendly foray for a really grisly horror filmmaker. And both of those dudes were included in the original essay that coined the infamous term torture porn, which I believe was written by David Edelstein for New York Magazine in like 2004, 2005. And it's a really interesting list of movies because you can see how, like, why they were lumped together, but on their own, they're all very different movies. You have Hostel by, of course, Mr. Eli Roth, the first Saw movie, Wolf Creek, which the interesting thing is just like all of these movies are kind of read as very American, like Iraq War related. And obviously the Iraq-Afghanistan war, like international conflicts and stuff, but Wolf Creek is an Australian slasher. The Devil's Rejects by Rob Zombie and The Passion of the Christ was also included in that lineup of torture porn movies, which, like, you know, you can make a case, I think. But they are pretty different movies. And like The Devil's Rejects, I think, is like very much in this kind of like 70s, almost like the Wild Bunch, Bonnie and Clyde type mode. So, you know, Rob Zombie works a lot in these kind of like homage, vaguely like Tarantino-ish style. So The Munsters in some ways is is a weirdly like faithful adaptation in that it's just like feels like a TV show. It just has this very sort of like episodic, lackadaisical quality. It's just kind of a vibe movie. It's very colorful. It has a very weird, you know, it feels very stagey, very, you know, like a set, you know, like it could have been filmed with a live audience. And in some ways it almost feels like a bid for a pilot for a reboot of The Munsters, because it ends with them like going to Hollywood, ending up in the real human world from this like perpetually Transylvania like alternate reality that they inhabit. They like come into the real world of the suburbs and live in their house, and then at the end of the movie, sort of reverse Wizard of Oz, it goes to black and white, and then you have the end credits, which are the opening credits of the show. So all in all, you know, it's definitely necessarily not up there for me with the best works of Rob Zombie, which are really gut-wrenching and emotional and almost like Lynchian a little bit for me. But I did enjoy it quite a bit. It's very colorful. It's very fun. There's a song called Disco Vampire in it. That's a big bop, kind of. My one complaint is that one of my favorite on-screen performers, Mr. Kevin Nash, actor, you know, star of such films as Magic Mike XXL, professional wrestler, former basketball player for the University of Tennessee. He said in a recent interview with Stone Cold Steve Austin that Herman Munster was his dream role because, you know, he's a big guy but a gentle giant, and he does act and is in a lot of things, mostly like direct-to-video bullshit. And, you know, there's just like that kind of performer who is very physically imposing and large. You know, there's not a lot of more like sensitive roles, and Herman Munster is a very sensitive character. So I am kind of disappointed that I don't even know who it is. Who's Herman Munster?
Jeff Daniel Phillips.
Yeah, there's some. it's a very weird cast. Like, there's not really any stars in this movie. It's sort of
Yeah,
odd.
this guy hasn't done it. Like, you could have just had Kevin Nash.
Yeah, I know.
Kevin Nash honestly would have been like the biggest name of the movie.
Yeah, no, and that's the one thing that is a little odd about it is I'm just like, I don't exactly know how Rob Zombie made, because it is a intellectual property. Also, could be a franchise starter or whatever, but it's just this weird little love story with like no name actors on it. So I guess he just made it so cheaply that they were just like, what the hell? We'll put it on Netflix. But
Yeah.
it's on Netflix. It's a good time.
All right.
So this year's Hubie Halloween. While we wait,
I gotta do my annual rewatch of Hubie Halloween.
Yeah, me too.
Which sickens Andrew, so it's really fun. All right, well, we're gonna take a quick break, and then we're gonna talk about that old house with a clock in its wall after this. Pesky clocks in the damn walls.
Just keeps on ticking.
It sure does.
Sometimes Kyle MacLachlan comes back from war and just is like, I don't know about it.
Wait, it's okay. It's been so long that I've done this. What audio format do you like?
If AIFF or
Right,
MP3 works, either one of those. Either one of those.
Word.
Oh man. Oh.
Nice.
I was gonna say. I love Hubie Halloween though. I might go watch Hubie Halloween tomorrow.
It's a comfort classic.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Did you watch? I haven't asked you. Did you watch Hustle, the new?
Yeah, I did. It was a nice movie. It didn't. Don't feel like it really necessarily. It really lasted in my brain, but
it wasn't incredible. I forgot.
High flying bird in terms
of
recent basketball movies, but
That's
yeah,
true.
it was fun. I feel like even though he's always dresses in the very Adam Sandler attire, usually in most of his roles, I felt like that was especially him just being cozy mode, just let me just roll up to work in my really oversized baggy gym shorts and play this character where I just hang out in hotel rooms and eat fast food. It's even when he's dramatic, he still just wants to go on vacation.
Yeah, it was literally the first 20 minutes of it is just him in hotel rooms complaining about being an NBA scout and eating McDonald's. Yeah, no, it was he wanted a pure movie that's it's not the usual Happy Madison fare, but also it's pure Sandler.
Yeah.
You guys will like this. My school where I teach, we had homecoming week a couple weeks ago. And so every day there's a different theme that students can dress up as if they want. And one of the days was just Adam Sandler Day. And so we just had a bunch of students who came in baggy clothes. And all of them were just yeah, I'm just wearing my dad's clothes. And I was like, that tracks. This definitely looks like high school circa 2004.
There's in a white t-shirt and super baggy basketball pants.
Yeah, that was it. They wore jerseys and
nice.
jerseys and baggy,
that's incredible,
gym shorts.
All right, let's talk about some clock houses. Honestly, I was trying to remember when this came out, and this has to be one of the biggest marketing butcher jobs of all time.
Why's that?
If you watch a trailer, after watching the movie, and then you watch the trailer for the movie, the trailer for the movie doesn't know what the hell this movie is. And then I remember it kind of just getting a 2-week run of trailers, and then the movie came out, and it kind of got slid.
It was an August
it was
release, I think, or something. I mean, I think it did
pretty good
but
box office.
Yeah, it was just a weird. It was one of those. Oh, we don't know how to sell it. Which is
Yeah.
weird because, like, in the notes, I'll go over it. Spielberg was like he and Eli Roth were like the entire time working on
Yeah,
this.
I mean, this is
Wow.
Amblin production.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, 131 million worldwide. That's not too shabby. But
The house didn't keep on ticking. Stopped. The clock ran out.
clock right now. That's good though. I'm glad it did well because it's a weird ass movie. For
this is a weird
2018.
movie.
And he had 2 movies that year because I think Death Wish came out the same year.
It was,
2018.
yeah.
Very weird double feature.
What a double feature for Eli.
Yeah,
Now he's working on the
like-
Borderlands movie,
Yeah.
which is
Like the video
something.
game?
Yeah, with Kate
Oh.
Blanchett. Also.
Kate Blanchett is in it.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess
It's
the
a really
check.
weird. It's a really weird cast. Yeah, Kate Blanchett, Gina Gershon, Bobby Lee, Jamie Lee Curtis. It's co-written by Craig Mazin, who is he did that Chernobyl show
Oh,
for
What?
HBO. He also did a couple scary movies. He also did the Last of Us show that's coming out. He also did Hangover Part 3 as a screenwriter. What a career.
Yeah,
That's
that
a
guy's
career for sure.
It's
Hold
so
on,
weird
I
'cause
got-
all the movies are like really lowbrow comedies, and then
Hold
all the
on.
shows are like prestige stuff.
Okay. So this guy, he wrote Scary Movie 3 and 4, Superhero Movie, Hangover Part 3, Identity Thief, Hangover Part 3, The Huntsman, Winter's War. Then he goes and makes Chernobyl, which is like critically acclaimed. And now he's making The Last of Us. And then he also wrote the screenplay for Borderlands and is allegedly writing a story for an untitled Pirates of the Caribbean project starring
Oh my
Margot
God.
Robbie. And then,
Chernobyl out of like that is just so funny.
yeah, who was like, oh, this guy can make that?
This guy can make a serious movie about like bureaucratic incompetence of the twilight of the USSR.
And he also played Louis B. Mayer in You Must Remember This.
Oh my god.
What a
Hollywood.
guy. Craig Mazin. All right.
I think he's a big like Twitter guy. I think he's a big thread
mean, like-
poster.
I mean,
Oh,
like
boy.
you do you, man. Like it's just
Yeah.
astounding. All right. Sorry on that tangent. There you go, you two
No.
people.
It's good.
All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And we're back with part 2 of episode 426 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be continuing our not young critics. Holy shit, I'm so tired. Our horror for kids series. with
Young
28
horror series.
Or
young horror for old critics.
Young horror for old critics series with 2018's The House with a Clock in Its Walls. Directed by Eli Roth. From a
Movies were
script by-
too old to be watching.
Yeah, that's true. No, I'm off it.
I threw you
Directed
off,
by
I'm sorry.
Eli Roth from a script by Eric Kripke, based on the novel of the same name by John Bellairs. The film stars Jack Black, Kate Blanchett, Owen Vaccaro, and Kyle MacLachlan. 10-year-old Lewis goes to live with his oddball uncle in a creaky old house that contains a mysterious tick-tock noise. He soon learns-
TikTok.
Yeah, right? It's real timely. He soon
Also,
learns-
I'm sorry, but I said to myself in my head, Kyle MacLachlan. I can't stop thinking about that.
We're here all night, folks. He soon learns that Uncle Jonathan and his feisty neighbor, Mrs. Zimmerman. Well, all right, that's an adjective.
Colin
Are
Camp,
powerful.
by the way.
Yeah, that's true. Are powerful practitioners of the magic arts. When Lewis accidentally awakens the dead, the town's sleepy facade suddenly springs to life, revealing a secret and dangerous world of witches, warlocks, and deadly curses. That describes nothing of what happens.
And boy witches.
Boy
That's
witches.
right. He has a real hard time with the term warlock.
Eli Roth, talking about why he chose to make this movie in a 2018 interview with Collider, said, "I understand that I've certainly branded myself and marketed myself that way. So I understand why people would think of me that way, but think about my favorite directors like Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson, and I look at their early movies and where they went in their careers. I remember when I thought, wow, Sam Raimi is doing Spider-Man. I want to see what the guy who did Evil Dead will do with Spider-Man. And I wanted to see what Peter Jackson, the guy who did Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles, would do with Lord of the Rings and how he would apply that sensibility to the fantasy genre. So I always looked at myself as hoping to have that kind of career trajectory, like Guillermo del Toro, Sam Raimi, Tim Burton, and Peter Jackson. I've wanted to do a Terry Gilliam Time Bandits kind of movie, and I said to my
he
agent,
is just dropping names.
He is. He said, find me a Time Bandits. Otherwise, I'll just have to write something. They were like, he did Hostel. How are we going to fund that? But that's where Steven Spielberg and Amblin came in. Steven loves Hostel. He saw it and got it and said, quote, yeah, I completely get how this can
That man is a freak.
The director of Jaws went on to make E.T. That makes perfect sense in his head. So he really backed me and supported me. When I think back to my childhood, those violent movies that I've known for now, I didn't know until I was maybe 12 or 13 and they were on VHS at a sleepover. The movies that I saw in theater when I was 9, 10, 11, and 12 were those scary Amblin movies that were everything to me. Like E.T., Raiders, Gremlins, Goonies, Poltergeist.
Harry and the Hendersons.
Harry and the Hendersons. There were other oddball movies like Time Bandits where the kids' parents blow up at the end and a guy gets turned into a pig. That was mind-blowing as a child. I had never seen anything like that. There were other movies like Dragon Slayer, The Dark Crystal, and Labyrinth that were much closer to Grimm's fairy tales where characters die. They're very dark stories that aren't always funny, but those are the movies that were gateway drug movies. Those were the movies that got you into scary movies.
You wonder why he is friends with Quentin Tarantino. You know?
Exactly right. Roth on the scene, the automaton scene. I just added this because it's really funny. I love creepy automatons. I said to Steven Spielberg, I was like, I want to have a scene where the automatons attack. And Steven said, I love automatons. I collect automatons. My kids won't let me put them in the house because they say they're too creepy. He has them packed away in crates. He has a warehouse with crates of automatons. He said, can I put them in the movie? And he was like, really? You'd want to put my automatons in the movie? And I was like, of course, Steven Spielberg. I'd like to use your automatons. There's a history with magicians and automatons. And I thought, what if they came to life and attacked? They could be one of my signature scenes. Our art department was so into building the automatons. They're all horror fans who are tatted up, and they wanted to have a real satanic looking one. We named all of them. I sat in the room with those automatons and thought, I just want to be here.
It's like a Seinfeld bit. They're just saying the word automaton over and over again. I'm also convinced now that Steven Spielberg's ostensible warehouse full of automatons is the Area 51 from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Automatons.
Honestly, I just want to read Eli Roth interviews about this movie. They're
they're
all like that wild.
The quotes that you read were more entertaining than the movie itself.
Jack Black on the Horror for Kids angle in an interview with Entertainment Weekly. Things have changed, obviously, because of the YouTubes. Kids are exposed to some things that they didn't used to be. So sadly, yeah, there might be a little bit of numbness. But this is an opportunity for us to curate a good, scary experience that doesn't include anything that's too nightmare-inducing. That was definitely part of the appeal of doing
dang Slender Man.
You take the kids to not worry that they're going to be too freaked out. The New York Times in 2018 said the pleasures of the movie are mainly in the design of the Victorian house and its grounds, replete with a chair that behaves like a dog, and in the affection for recreating the 1950s period, down to the surprise use of Ovaltine. Mr. Black is perhaps too sardonic a presence, but Miss Blanchett, as a fellow spellcaster, takes evident pleasure in deadpanning lines like, I melted Salvador Dali's watch once, right off his wrist. Playing material like this with conviction is its own form of magic. And the LA Times 2018 said, for all its loud wallpaper and diverting CGI bric-a-brac, this lavish reimagining of Casa Brenavelt, whatever the hell John or Jack Black's character is, cannot quite compete with the book's illustrations rendered by the great Edward Gorey for sheer evocative strangeness. Still, there is plenty to marvel at here with the sentimental jack-o'-lanterns and flatulent plant sculptures to the stained glass window, whose colorful images seem to morph every hour. On that note, House with a Clock at its walls. Nadine, I'm curious. Had you seen this before as like an Eli Roth person, or was this the
I
first
had
time?
not actually.
What was that
This
experience
is
like?
the last of his feature films that I have not seen, and I was definitely curious because it seemed like an outlier, and I was sort of interested to see him do that kind of homage to the many films that he listed off in that interview that you quoted.
I can't even name 3 of them.
I don't even know the last movie like that had an Amblin Entertainment card at the beginning of it. Like, I don't know what even.
I was like halfway convinced when I watched it because they have the old Universal logo like
Mhm.
at the beginning too, and I was like, "Is this just a bit? Like, is it just like pretending to be like an older movie?" But no, like it's real. But like for a half second, I was like, maybe this is just like part of the pastiche.
And I'm always, sort of interested by movies like this where they're like intentionally, a filmmaker who's really kind of typecast, I guess, whatever the directorial equivalent of that is trying to stretch their normal boundaries a little bit. Okay, I'm pulling up Amblin Entertainment. Oh wow, there's a lot more Amblin movies than I thought. Like, I mean, most of the like Spielberg things, but Cats, A Dog's Purpose, A Dog's Journey, The
Cats was
100,
Amblin.
I guess so, The 100-Foot Journey,
A lot of
some J.J.
journeys.
Abrams movies. A movie that I was thinking about while watching this, Monster House. Wow, that's also an Amblin movie. That's
Oh,
basically kind of the same movie, Monster House, The Living
yeah,
House.
you're right.
Yes,
And
the cats you're thinking about, Michael. It is an
there's
Amblin movie.
there's
Huh.
a lot of there's some interesting things about this movie. Um, but it is definitely, I think, a little bit of a for the auteurs, for the real fans. Like, if you're like, convince me that Eli Roth is an interesting filmmaker, I don't think I would necessarily direct you towards House with a Clock in Its Walls first. There are those kind of genuine, I feel like, sort of elements of those kind of Amblin movies. Like, I was thinking a little bit in some of the effects and stuff, like part where like the stained glass is like making words. It's kind of like some of those like early like Industrial Light and Magic special effects movies, like Young Sherlock Holmes, and like, I don't know, just that kind of like young adult movie. And
Yeah.
it's sort of, but the thing about it is it's not really that much of a like departure for Eli Roth in a lot of ways, because it's still pretty gross and horrific.
Mhm.
The
And
barfing pumpkins were pretty gross.
yeah, and Michael, you mentioned when talking about Knock Knock, just his sort of like formal elegance. So like, I can see why he would be attracted to the idea of a haunted house movie, because like, I don't know, you watch something like the Conjuring movies and those feel almost like amusement park rides a little bit. Like, there's just a lot of things going on and kind of contraptions, and like, you have a very just like sense of space. And I felt like this movie never really had a clearly defined like sense of space. It's very surprisingly kind of dim and like washed out. And I was watching the credits and I spotted the little state of Georgia peach. And I just feel like that just kind of says a lot about the visual style, where it's that sort of like just totally green screen warehouse, like previs sort
They
of.
filmed it in Atlanta.
Yeah, so it has the sort of Marvel sort of sheen to it a little bit. I mean, it really, like, in terms of the color palette and stuff, isn't that different than like Doctor Strange or something. Like, there's
What is
some
can I
nice
interrupt?
details,
Like,
but
what has happened to like effects driven movies, or even like not effects driven, like movies like that are like digital film movies, like are
mhm.
so hard to watch these days because of the color and the lighting is just so dim. Like, I watched the new Predator movie Prey, and which was like pretty good, but it was hard to watch because the lighting like sucked.
Dude, you
Like,
Yeah.
should watch an episode of like Game of Thrones. It's I'd
like
rather like
why? What
it's
has happened?
terrible. I don't
Like,
know. It's terrible.
this is a tangent, but what has happened? I watched a movie from like 10 years ago, and it's like the colors pop even on a
Mhm.
movie that's not like meant to have popping colors. Like, I don't know what's going on in Hollywood, but
Nobody knows how to light a scene. I
yeah,
don't know.
like what is it that I don't know. Is it that like whatever like effect style is being used now, people haven't like adjusted lighting techniques to make it work, or I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
don't got
think
an
that
answer.
could. Yeah, I mean, I don't. I don't know enough about the specific technical nitty gritty, but that would kind of make sense to me, especially just considering how much of the image is like being sort of digitally constructed. It's like
Yeah.
I feel like it's not just like filling in little details. It's like really having to create so much of the image in post production that I just feel like it's hard for me to imagine that just doesn't like throw kind of a lot of things off. Um and yeah, there are these like kind of compelling imaginative images and stuff like you mentioned the pumpkins and like some stuff like that, but I felt like it was a lot of missed potential. um Honestly, there is some like interesting subtext. It's very gay coded, I felt like, personally.
Yeah, we need to get to that real quick though on like the effects and stuff. To play devil's advocate, I agree they're not perfect, and like if they
Mhm.
were practical, like I'm thinking about a movie we watched. Well, last week you have the Addams Family, and the week before we had The Witches, which are both two great practical effects movies.
Mhm.
But the thing I did like about this movie is that at least it seems like they're trying with like he's trying with the VFX. Like I would give him like it seems like they're trying more than like a Marvel movie to do to at least like create something that seems
Mhm.
like again they're kind of going for the horror effect, but like you mentioned, I mean, we talked about the automatons. You had the automatons, you had the pumpkins, you had
It is
um
also like very Return to Oz, a movie we did in the first
Yeah.
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 iteration.
I mean, honestly, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I was like,
No, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
do appreciate this more than a lot of other movies that like lean on VFX because I'm like, at least this one's trying to create stuff that's not just the same, the same little green screen orb all over again.
Yeah, the design of like the actual design of stuff is pretty cool. Like the house looks like the house doesn't look cool because of like the lighting problems I've talked about, but in terms of like what the house is and like how it's modeled, that looks pretty neat too. Like I think there's a lot of cool stuff in terms of like production design or
Mhm.
whatever the digital version of that is.
And if anything, that I wish they, because I liked this well enough. I
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
too sure about it. I liked it well enough though, and I appreciated that it like went as weird as you possibly could go, like in modern movie times.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm surprised that when we were talking in the break that like this did pretty well at the box office. Because I'm like, this seems like one that would just be kind of ignored today because
There's
it's too weird. It's
there's
just too
not a
weird.
lot of like kids movies that I feel like really slot into the like live. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
know. I feel like just the majority of kid marketed movies today are like entirely animated, and this
Yeah,
sort of like
or a superhero movie.
yeah, and this sort of like it's kind of edgy, but also
Mhm.
kind of kid friendly. Is like I don't know how
No,
much
I mean
of that
it's
there
a
is in that.
disturbing movie a lot of times. Like, it's like it's not a it's a very disturbing movie a lot of times for at least, like for a kids movie. Like that automaton scene is pretty freaking creepy because Steven Spielberg has a creepy ass collection of those things, I guess. Um but no, like I think I was impressed with it because I do, even though there's some holes in it. The one thing I just wish is like you were talking about the house, Michael. I wish like the beginning of the movie we could have spent more like we kind of jump into the plot too quickly. I wish we could have spent some time just like being weird and we're wasting time in the house,
Right.
Like
Yeah,
last week we talked about this with Adam's Family where 75% of that movie is just them dicking around, doing stuff. And I'm like, I wish this movie could have just been like you got Jack Black there. Like
yeah,
just have weird time.
Well, and he's
Um,
even introduced with like he's like, "There's no rules, kid. Do whatever you want." And then there's
yeah.
not a lot of like no rulesing about like in
it's
the
just like
Yeah,
movie.
they jump to the magic real quickly.
I wanted a little bit more of like they had the chair that was alive, which I thought was really cool, but I wanted a bit more of that like Beauty and the Beast, like anthropomorphized kind of shenanigans.
Yeah. The beginning of this movie is really weirdly paced. Like, for instance, like the kid shows up at the house and Jack Black's like talking. He's like, you know, what's your deal, kid, and whatever. And then like the kid just starts crying. He's like, my parents died in a car
That
crash.
kid's
And he's
fucking
like,
annoying.
and then Jack Black's like, oh man, I'm sorry. And then they kind of move on. Like, there's no like scene explaining like his parents dying or whatever. It's just like a weird bit of like exposition at the beginning of the movie, and then they're just like jumping in.
Yeah, I'm surprised they don't show the parents die. It seems like Eli Roth would have given us just like a very disturbing scene of like a car
I was
crash.
like, is Kyle MacLachlan his dad? Like, I was kind of confused a little bit with that stuff. And also, it's just like, I feel like there's a lot of like kids' movies with like dead parents and stuff. I'm just like, this is just kind of
I'm so tired of dead parent
like
kids movies. Yeah, it's awful.
Just make Jack Black and Cate Blanchett their parents.
But it also felt, well, speaking of that, like, you know, I mentioned the kind of gay coding a little bit, and I feel like it does, in addition to sort of interplaying with the like kind of Amblin type of subgenre, you know, being a sort of haunted house movie, I feel like it is a little bit in conversation with like the sort of older Hollywood kind of, you know, like The Uninvited or even something like Rebecca a little bit, where I feel like there's just like a lot of in those movies, like, you know, just the sort of trope of the like adult bachelor or single woman who's a spinster who lives in a spooky house alone, and they're usually, it's kind of implied that they're probably gay, and especially just with the stuff here about like boy witches and you're the black swan, and just like also the friendship with the kid and the bully feels a little like, you know, their kids, it's not like sexual, but just a little bit like crushing vibes a little bit, and trying to like impress your crush by bringing the dead back to life.
There's like a little bit of like unrequited element of that, because they're like kind of friends when they're both outcasts at the beginning of the movie, and then the kid's arm heals and he becomes like class president or something. And then it's like,
which I like what was holding him back was his arm broken. They're like, I don't know about you.
Also, I thought it was funny that they're like, I don't know, it's kind of this like satirical element of this like social politicking like kid, because there's like the girl who's like, oh, he only becomes nice when he's like running for office or something.
Yeah.
That was weird.
No, I could definitely see that, just because plus the relationship between the Cate Blanchett character and the Jack Black character, it's fun, but it's just definitely a different. It doesn't feel like it's feeding into a trope. It's a
brother and sister, you know.
Yeah, it's an odd thing. I mean, they like have prolonged scenes where they're just like yelling at each other, and you're like, oh, okay.
You're just yelling insults.
Yeah. And even Cate Blanchett's character kind of just feels very aloof from anything like that.
Yeah. I did think it was kind of, it doesn't necessarily really go anywhere, but it just, in terms of like subtext, I was kind of interested that there's this sort of like, I felt like implied kind of Nazism to
that's all I want to talk about.
The Kyle MacLachlan character, where they're like, he was a warlock and he went to war in Germany and he got lost in the Black Forest and met a freaky little, I don't know, forest guy. Yeah, little Rip Van Winkle leprechaun.
I was reading a bunch of like Letterboxd reviews who were saying that it's like this kind of like Holocaust allegory of he saw just like this unimaginable evil, and so he like created this narrative in his mind to like wash that out, because he just couldn't live with himself dealing with that, which I thought was a really interesting movie.
That scene is like kind of crazy, where they have the B-roll newsreel World War II footage like playing over Kyle MacLachlan like having this seizure in a field, and it's like kind of this weirdly like, adult sort of expressive touch. But even though like, the automaton part, it kind of feels a little bit like sort of reminds me of the whole golem, like Jewish myth of the kind of living automaton made out of clay. And it's just kind of interesting, because I feel like, something like Inglourious Bastards, I feel like Eli Roth's performance in that, and just the movie in general, obviously gets talked a lot about in conversation with Jewish identity. But I feel like Eli Roth sometimes like something like, I don't know, just watching this movie and thinking about that sort of like Nazi and Holocaust imagery, I was kind of like, obviously in the context of the 2000s, like Hostel is in conversation with Iraq War and like the imagery of Abu Ghraib and things. But I was just like sort of looking back on it, I'm like, oh, there's clearly a sort of like Holocaust kind of subtext to, especially just like being Central Eastern Europe. The Hostel movies, there is this kind of like, I feel like it feels just a little bit sort of informed by like that historical trauma in a way.
Yeah, and there's like an element in the Hostel movies that I think is kind of, I don't know if it's intentionally in conversation with this movie, but like there is a sort of in both the Hostel movies that I saw, like the characters get into the situation, where they're in like the death cult, or the like torture cult or whatever it is, and they all like have regrets about like in the second movie, it's like from the perspective of the like the actual torturers, and like one of the guys like keeps wanting to back out, but he keeps being like pulled into it. And then in the first movie, like there's like the like reluctance of this dude to like do like the frat boy, like expat like kind of partying that the main characters want to do, and they're always being pulled into it. And by the like there's a point in the movie where there's like a Rubicon that they cross where like undoing anything previously is like impossible. And like that's kind of like the horror of Hostel, is like even were these people to escape, which one of them does at the end of the first Hostel movie, there is like no undoing their getting involved with like this whole thing. And then like Kyle MacLachlan's plot, like the titular clock, is meant to like unmake the world, and so they can do the world again better the second time. Like there's a sort of like similar like penchant for like this unimaginable horror, like the thing that you would want to do would be to undo it. Like that's like the strongest, like most natural urge, and like there's a sort of like impossibility that it can be undone in real life. And in this movie it's kind of interesting because like there's a like it's portrayed as like genocidal to want to undo like the world, because he doesn't want to remake the world with humans in it, which is kind of weird and fucked up. But
there's something just with the sort of superhero movie-ish visual quality. There's something very kind of like Thanos or like some of the like DC movies. It's like a kind of supervillain element to it.
Well, it also has this whole element of like being this, to a degree, 50s period piece, but it's and I saw this reading on Letterboxd as well, where it's like it's this 1950s period piece movie, but you're not reckoning with anything that would actually be going on in like 1950s America. Like they have a whole conversation about a water fountain at a school, and it's not the conversation you would have been having in the 50s. It's that there's no like soda in it or whatever. And
right.
And like there's like a scene where the kids are lined up just kind of yelling like water fountain, water. And it's just kind of this weird, it's almost like this like whole, like the whole thing's like this kind of alternate reality.
Does it even
and like, it's an integrated
somewhere, like
it's in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's an integrated high school. Which I guess wouldn't have been unusual in the 50s in Michigan, maybe, but even so, it feels it's weird.
It's not like they have to have a whole thing to like, but it's just it's just a very unacknowledged like, this is a messy period.
It's a little like Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in some ways. I don't know,
but no, if you kind of look at it like through this lens of like this is the alternate reality that they're in, but even though you kind of have like this ideal state where like you're not having the kind of civil unrest of the 50s and 60s, but you still have the Holocaust that has happened, and like you have to, and you're trying, it's like there's never, to me, it's like there's never going to be this reality where everything is just going to be perfectly laid out. Like even though you have more perfect integration in this reality that we're living in this movie, you still have the Holocaust that happened. So it's just kind of like, we just have to clear everything out. It's this constant like fighting with there's always a bit of evil somewhere.
There's always a ticking behind.
There's always a tick-tock.
Right. There's always
That's the movie. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. But no, I think that kind of adds to almost like the unnerving quality of it. Like it is, it's just kind of this like unbalanced state to it that makes it. I don't know if it necessarily adds to it, but it makes it interesting. It makes it much more interesting than than a lot of other equivalent movies that are coming out around this time.
Yeah, in fact, speaking of Thanos, 2018, isn't that the year of the snap? Like
Yeah, I think so.
Thanos. That is kind of like a weird, like, because this is a very. I remember when I saw I can't remember the name of the movie. Infinity War. I remember when I saw Infinity War, I was like left thinking like, this is a movie that's so full of like kooky elements, but they're not allowed to be kooky. You know, like all the superheroes have these really bizarre powers because they're like kind of space gods and like radioactive people and all that sort of. But they all do the same thing, which is like punch and then like shoot energy from their fists. And it is kind of interesting to compare it to this movie in which like it's not like an amazing movie, and like as we talked about, the effects aren't amazing, but there is still like a vivaciousness and interesting like quality about it that like is kind of in reference like in conversation with the Marvel movies in a way. Like I mean like the snap versus like the undoing the world sort of thing, but also just like I don't know, like there's zapping magic in this movie too, but then there's like interesting permutations on that, or even just like the freaking creatures, like the cat that like just farts leaves, like the hedgerow cat, or like the pumpkins are like the pumpkins are interesting because they're like CGI, but they vomit like practical goo, I think, on the characters. And I mean, it's not like amazing. It's not like you mentioned Sam Raimi, and it, I can imagine like the classic Sam Raimi movies have this kind of chaotic, like, smorgasbord of creatures that is much more interesting. But at the same time, like compared to like what a kind of studio, like, middle school audience movie, like it does have some signs of life that are abnormal.
Yeah, I don't, it's I enjoyed it well enough. It's not great. It's still, it still has its holes, but like I do appreciate that like Eli Roth's like kind of going for it. It doesn't all work, but he did go for it. And like and honestly at this point it's kind of like the thing that people talk about with a lot of movies, that there's not many people going for it especially like kind of like this is a in theaters mainstream like mass produced movie through Universal and Amblin, and it's like being weird and strange and not necessarily like trying to meet its audience. It's just kind of going, I'm this way and you can deal with it. And that's not necessarily what you see in theaters. A lot of it's trying to kind of give people the experience that they're expected what they're expecting when they go in the door.
Well, I think like there's elements of this movie that are kind of like capitulating to audience expectations, and they're the most like tedious elements of the movie. Like one of the reviews mentioned like how goofy Jack Black is, and like it's Jack Black, so of course he's going to be goofy, and I don't have a problem with that. But like some of the dialogue that he is doing is like feels very like 2010 family blockbuster kind of like dialogue, and
that's gotta hurt kind of stuff.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like it's like constantly stuff like that, and like that really took me out of the movie in a way. Like Cate Blanchett is allowed to be kind of like steely and cold, and she kind of like pulls that off. But
she
Jack Black
understood the
is kind of
assignment,
mugging a little bit. I think Jack assignment too, because like that's what he's doing. But I just don't like the assignment.
Yeah, he does kind of. I mean, as much as I love him, he does have sometimes one note that he.
Yeah, I mean, I like Jack Black. I'm a big fan of Jack Black, but he's like a little much here, and he's not a little much because he's Jack Black. He's a little bit much because of the material that he's been given. Like, I don't know. Like, I like Jack Black as like the kooky, like Merlin uncle type guy. Like, that's like a fun role. It's just like some of the specific things. Like another thing, like I mean, this is kind of like just funny, but like there's a part in the movie where Jack Black's like, "I gotta pee," and he says that for like no apparent reason, except like it's kind of like a laugh line. And later in the scene, he like turns into a baby and pees, and like the act of him turning into a baby is very funny and weird.
Oh
But him
yeah.
peeing is like, I don't know, like to me that feels like again like kind of
Can we address the surrealness of when Jack Black turns into a baby and keeps his head, but
the
is
same
on
side.
a newborn baby's body?
The part I couldn't look away from was the neck, because the
Yeah,
neck was
it was-
like it had to connect to the baby's body. It was
Just like
it was out there.
somewhere you can like probably go to
Yeah,
an auction of Hollywood props and buy that little fucked up
I would
baby.
do that too.
It's
That
like how
would be
I feel like
insane.
I've seen like a listing for like the naked body of Sylvester Stallone in Demolition Man, like in cryogenic freezing, and I feel like it'd be one of those really just like bizarre things you could get.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to compare this movie to The Witches. Like we compared this I think like very briefly to The Munsters, because that's like, Rob Zombie doing a kids movie. But I think The Witches is an interesting comparison because that's Nicholas Roeg doing a kids movie. And I think like The Witches is a more interesting movie than this movie, but I think the effects are kind of the same in the sense of when I watch The Witches, and maybe y'all feel different, but when I watch The Witches, I can see the Nicholas Roeg weirdness in it, but I'm also a little bit like there's elements of the movie that are kind of tedious and boring to me in The
Yeah.
Witches because of the way that it has to like just kind of capitulate to a certain like expectations of I don't know. The Witch is a weird movie, but it does kind of have because of not just it being Roald Dahl, but because of the kind of like era of movie it's coming out in. It's got like a kind of like it feels like a family movie from the 1980s or 90s in some degree, like the kid.
Yeah.
I think the kids are all irritating in these movies. And that's the problem.
I was gonna say the kid's fucking annoying in The Witches. So if you
In
have
The
an
Witches
annoying ass
and
kid,
annoying in a clock, House of the Clock in its walls, like maybe it's that, like maybe like
Yeah.
maybe it's that like
Fucking
having the young
kids.
like audience surrogate kids.
he has like such a like you just want to slap the shit out of him.
You know
when he
what this
cries.
movie also kind of reminded me of in terms of like kind of annoying kids? Hugo. This to me felt like Eli Roth's
Yeah.
Hugo. Like in Asa Butterfield or whatever his made up name is. Little Ender's Game over here. Okay, buddy. What is he up to now?
I have
Well,
no idea.
I'll look for you, but Asa Butterfield. Oh, he's in that sex education show.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
I wonder what-
Also, connecting back to the whole thing about the Holocaust was The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which is a reprehensible
Oh my
movie that we
God.
should arrest him for.
Oh wow, this
also
kid,
Ender's Game is about Hitler, kind of. So
the house with a clock in its walls, the kid is from Daddy's Home. And Daddy's Home too.
Oh wow.
Oh, they brought him back.
Well, Daddy's not home anymore because he died in the car crash.
Oh no.
He's also in the movie Team Marco. What is Finding Ohana?
I don't know what any of these movies are.
The first
Fun mom dinner.
Finding Ohana.
Mother's Day. That's one of those scary Marshall movies.
All of these movies have parents in the titles. Daddy's Home, Mother's Day, Fun Mom Dinner, Daddy's Home 2.
Finding Ohana. Ohana means family. Family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten.
Oh my
Jeez.
God.
This kid's got a type. No, he's terrible. He was bad. The kid, and then the broken arm kid also.
The wrong kid
Awful.
died.
Yeah, the wrong kid died. But no, the arm kid is awful. He sounds like he's like
What else was he
had
in?
like
He
3
was in-
antidepressants and he was.
Oh my
acting.
God, he's the kid from mid-90s.
He
That's
is.
he
No
was.
way.
He is,
And
yeah.
Killing of a Sacred Deer. And he's in the God of War game.
He's annoying in that game too.
3 of the games.
Good grief.
Wow. That would suck. So just like your job is to be an annoying child actor. Like,
I feel like that's like at least 50% of the child actor roles.
oh yeah,
That's true.
definitely. Definitely most of them. Like the kid Spritle from Speed Racer, that kid.
Jeez.
They're
Yeah.
definitely
So I don't know.
slow.
I guess the moral of the story is that like, and we kind of invite these sorts of movies with our series Horror for Kids, but
Yeah.
it's conceptually interesting to have like an adult film, not adult film, like an adult director. To have
It
an
is
adult
interesting to
The
have
cock
an
in its walls.
House with a cock and ball.
I bet Jack Black's character would like that.
Yeah, he's doing something in there.
But anyway, like I don't know, like I guess you brought up Hugo, and I think that's maybe like one of the better case scenarios of these. But like I don't know that I've seen like the movie where the like serious adult director directs like a kids movie. I'm trying to think of the one where that it's like, wow, that's really like an indispensable part of this director's like oeuvre, you know?
I haven't seen it, but I know some people say that Fritz Lang's Moonfleet is
Okay.
like secretly his best, his like kind of kids pirate movie.
Oh.
But that's going way back.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I mean,
I don't know
maybe
either.
like Terry Gilliam with Time Bandits. People really like Time Bandits.
But kind of all his movies are kids.
Yeah, some of his
Yeah.
movies are just R-rated Time
And that's
Bandits.
the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. Too. Like Spielberg, obviously has like very adult movies, but I also feel like he's not like it's not like he did one.
Well, he's known.
Movie.
He's known for like kind of having kids, like E.T. and Jurassic Park and Raiders, and I mean, like those movies are not adult. Like that's what he's known for, and then he started making other stuff.
Entertainment.
Then he was like, let me just drop Schindler's List and Jurassic Park on the same week.
Yeah, I don't know. It's got a kind of Robert Zemeckis vibe.
Yeah,
he
I don't
makes
know.
a lot of kids movies.
Well, he had Pinocchio taking a shit in the new movie, so he's got it going.
Genius. Speaking of witches, he did that remake that I don't think anybody saw.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on House with a Clock on its Walls? I think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, I think if it came out in 2009, it would have starred Freddie Highmore. That's my take.
Are you talking about what the hell was that show?
August Rush.
Oh my gosh.
No. What's is it The Good Doctor?
The Good Doctor,
yeah.
The Good Doctor.
Fucking Finding Neverland or whatever.
Arthur and the Invisibles, the Spiderwick Chronicles.
This does also have a series of unfortunate events kind of vibe. I didn't realize that I don't think I've read the book. I didn't realize that the art was by Edward Gorey, though, who I was a big fan of when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I remember, I think I learned like about his work from the Masterpiece Mystery PBS, like opening credits. And I just really like that kind of like macabre, morbid, whimsical type stuff when I was like early teens. And I don't know where I was going with that, but
final thoughts right there.
Yeah, series of unfortunate events.
Yeah.
It's got that little bit kind of vibe to it.
It does. I have a final thought, which is that like we're in a weird phase of like cinema and cinephilia at the moment, in which like there are like so few movies, or there are fewer movies released, and this was true in 2018, but it's especially true now because of COVID and stuff. But there are fewer movies released, and also you have this kind of like overriding like studio aesthetic that is kind of like overbearing. And I think that we've like adopted like a sliding scale for what we consider interesting. Like you mentioned this movie being
most mid shit.
You mentioned like this movie being released in 2009, and I think if this movie were released in 2009, it would be unremarkable, like completely unremarkable.
Well, it would probably be one of those things like The Mummy or like The Mask of Zorro or like the first Pirates of the Caribbean, where people are like, oh, actually looking back on it, like that was pretty good. That was some competent filmmaking. Like that's what people would say about The House with the Clock in its Walls. Like this is some competent filmmaking. By the standards of today, this is better.
That's kind of what I
did.
I will go to bat for the Pirates movies, but like I think a lot of those other movies, like there's like if this weren't directed by Eli Roth, I would never watch this movie. And even with it being directed by Eli Roth, like I had to constantly remind myself, like, I'm interested in this because it's an Eli Roth movie, and therefore I was looking for those weird, like, little like Holocaust things. But had I not had that context, and if I were just like 19 seeing this with like my little brother in 2009, like I would have forgotten about this movie. And I think, I don't know, it's like this interesting thing in which, like, I don't know, every era like looks back to previous eras and looks at like kinds of media that don't get made very much anymore and has a kind of nostalgia for them. And but like cinephilia right now is in like a like overdrive of that, and like that's not all bad. Like it's cool that we can like just appreciate like mid rom-coms for what they are, rather than like, you know, hating their kind of ubiquity in the 2000s. Like, I mean, there's value in like appreciating things that aren't like, you know, like these like visionary masterpieces or whatever. But it is kind of weird that, I don't know, like this is not like a super, I didn't feel like this was a super engaging movie. It's like fine, but like it feels more interesting than it should be because we don't get movies with even this like little smidge of personality very much anymore.
Definitely.
That's fair. I kind of viewed it that way because I was like,
yeah,
this is better than some whatever Netflix shit they fart out every week. So
Like the farting cat.
that was great.
I did like. There's a lot. They get a lot of mileage out of like just
because it was like a big old thing. It was just like when I was like, oh damn.
There's a lot of mileage out of like the fart noise and then Jack Black yelling the litter box.
It's good. That's peak humor, people.
I do think maybe like the poop joke in the Family film it's a dying art, mostly because the Family film is a dying art. But like, there's probably like a game.
They don't make them like Osmosis Jones anymore. You know?
They sure don't. There's a game that you can play with like family films, especially of the 90s and early 2000s variety, which is that how long is it before the villain is going to have poop? Either they step in poop or have poop on them. Like it happens in almost every one of them.
Yeah, this does also, I don't know, this just, I feel like I'm Eli Roth in that interview, just like naming movies, but it does just like remind me of a lot of different movies like that, like Jumanji or there was something else that came to my mind, but I forgot what it was.
Do you want me to pull it up again?
No. There's just a lot of kids' family films.
E.T., Gremlins, Goonies, Poltergeist, Dragon Slayer, The Dark Crystal, Labyrinth.
The Goonies is not a real movie. I'm so fucking tired of the nostalgia around the Goonies because
the Goonies is not good.
Like Gremlins is a great movie. Joe Dante, amazing filmmaker. You know, Spielberg, great filmmaker. But like the Goonies, Richard Donner, like come the fuck on. Like watch a real movie. Like that. Get the Ready Player One shit out of here. Like no.
I think it would be really funny if Eli Roth was like enthusiastically name dropping movies, but it was like the Spider Chronicles or
that's gonna be what it is. And like some of these like letterbox zoomers who will give like 5
Spiderwick
stars,
Chronicles,
you know.
Ender's Game.
Yeah, exactly.
3 episodes of The Good Doctor.
The City of Emperor.
City
the
of
Mortal
Ember.
the
Instruments.
Inkheart.
The Brendan Fraser comeback, you know. Reconsider Inkheart. Journey to the Center of the Earth.
All right. I'm gonna put a stake in this one. And I'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we list all the movies that we talked about in this episode. If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/Cinematary. Whether it's 1, 5, or whatever, you can just if you feel like shouting out the show. Thank you to our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Corey Willingham, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marsati, Titus Arthur, and Tyler Chandler. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we're going to be concluding our Horror for Kids series with this year's Wendell and Wild, which comes out on Friday. So go give it a watch before we do the episode. Until then, Wendell and we're getting wild.
Wilding out.
Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.